Welcome to the O Horror Podcast. Join me as I take you on a journey of the senses and the mind into the darkness. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. The Company of Wolves. One beast, and one only, howls in the woods by night. The wolf is Carnivore Incarnate, and he's as cunning as he is ferocious. Once he's had a taste of flesh, then nothing else will do. At night, the eyes of wolves shine like candle flames, yellowish, reddish, but that is because the pupils of their eyes fatten on darkness and catch the light from your lantern to flash it back at you, red for danger. If a wolf's eyes reflect nothing but moonlight, then they gleam a cold and unnatural green, a mineral, a piercing colour. If the benighted traveller spies those luminous, terrible sequins stitched suddenly on the black thickets, then he knows he must run. If fear has not struck him stock still. But those eyes are all you will be able to glimpse of the forest assassins as they cluster invisibly round your smell of meat as you go through the wood unwisely late. They will be like shadows, they will be like wraiths, grey members of a congregation of nightmare. Hark, his long wavering howl, an aria of fear made audible. The wolf's song is the sound of the rendering you will suffer, in itself a murdering. It is winter and cold weather. In this region of mountain and forest, there is now nothing for the wolves to eat. Goats and sheep are locked up in the byre. The deer departed for the remaining pasturage on the southern slopes. Wolves grow lean and famished. There is so little flesh on them that you could count the starveling ribs through their pelts if they gave you the time before they pounced. Those slavering jaws, the lolling tongue, the rime of saliva on the grizzled chops of all the teeming perils of the night in the forest. Ghosts, hobgoblins, ogres that grill babies upon gridirons, witches that fatten their captives in cages for cannibal tables. The wolf is the worst, for he cannot listen to reason. You are always in danger in the forest, where no people are. Step between the portals of the great pines, where the shaggy branches tangle about you, trapping the unwary traveller in nets, as if the vegetation itself were in a plot with the wolves who live there, as though the wicked trees go fishing on behalf of their friends. Step between the gateposts of the forest, with the greatest trepidation and infinite precautions, for if you stray from the path for one instant, the wolves will eat you. They are as grey as famine, they are as unkind as plague. The grave-eyed children of the sparse villages always carry knives with them when they go out to tend to the little flocks of goats, to provide the homesteads with acrid milk and rank, maggoty cheeses. Their knives are half as big as they are, the blades are sharpened daily, but the wolves have ways of arriving at your own hearthside. We try and try, but sometimes we cannot keep them out. There is no winter's night in the cottager does not fear to see a lean, grey, famished snout questing under the door. And there was one woman once bitten in her own kitchen as she was straining the macaroni. Fear and flee the wolf, for worst of all, the wolf may be more than he seems. There was a hunter once, near here, that trapped the wolf in a pit. This wolf had massacred the sheep and goats, eaten up a mad old man who used to live by himself in a hut halfway up the mountain and sing to Jesus all day, pounced on a little girl looking after the sheep, but she made such a commotion that men came with rifles and scared him away. tried to track him into the forest, but he was cunning and easily gave him the slip. So this hunter dug a pit and put a duck in it for bait, all alive and he covered the pit with straw smeared with wolf dung. Quack, quack went the duck, and a wolf came slinking out the forest, a big one, a heavy one. He weighed as much as a grown man, and the one byre, a small building for the livestock straw, gave way beneath him. Into the pit he tumbled. The hunter jumped down after him, slits his throat, cuts off all his paws for a trophy. And then no wolf at all lay in front of the hunter, but the bloody trunk of a man, headless, footless, dying, dead. A witch from up the valley once turned an entire wedding party into wolves because the groom had settled on another girl. She used to order them to visit her at night from spite, and they would sit and howl around her, serenading her with their misery. Not so very long ago, a young woman in our village married a man who vanished clean away on her wedding night. The bed was made with new sheets, and the bride lay down in it. The groom said he was going out to relieve himself, insisted on it, for the sake of decency, and she drew the coverlet up to her chin. She lay there, and she waited, and she waited, and then she waited again. Surely he's been gone a long time, until she jumps up in bed and shrieks to hear a howling coming on the wind from the forest. That long, drawn, wavering howl has, for all its fearsome resonance, some inherent sadness in it, as if the beasts would love to be less beastly, if only they knew how and never ceased to mourn their own condition. There is a vast melancholy in the canticles of the wolves, melancholy infinite as the forest, endless as these long nights of winter, and yet that ghastly sadness, that mourning for their own irremediable appetites, can never move the heart, for not one phrase in it hints at the possibility of redemption. Grace could not come to the wolf from its own despair, only through some external mediator, so that sometimes the beast will look as if he half welcomes the knife that dispatches him. The young woman's brothers searched the outhouses and the haystacks, but never found any remains, so the sensible girl dried her eyes and found herself another husband, not too shy to piss into a pot, who spent the night outdoors. She gave him a pair of bonny babies, and all went right as a rivet, until one freezing night, the night of the solstice, the hinge of the year when things do not fit together as well as they should, the longest night, her first good man came home again. A great thump on the door announced him, as she was stirring the soup for the father of her children, and she knew the moment she lifted the latch to him, although it was years since she worn black for him, and now he was in rags and his hair was hung down his back and never saw a comb, alive with lice. "Here I am again, missus," he said. "Get me a bowl of cabbage and be quick about it." Then her second husband came in, with wood for the fire, and when the first one saw she'd slept with another man, and worse, clapped his red eyes on her little children, who crept into the kitchen to see what all the din was about, he shouted, "I wish I were a wolf again, to teach this whore a lesson." So a wolf he instantly became, and tore off the eldest boy's left foot before he was chopped up with the hatchet they used for chopping logs. But when the wolf lay bleeding there on the floor, they noticed its last gasping breath. The pelt peeled off again. He was just as he had been years ago, when he ran away from his marriage bed, so that she wept and her second husband beat her. They say there's an ointment the devil gives you that turns you into a wolf the minute you rub it on, or that he was born feet first and had wolf for his father, and his torso is man's, but his legs and genitals are a wolf's, and he has a wolf's heart. 7 years is a werewolf's natural span, but if you burn his human clothing, you condemn him to wolfishness for the rest of his life. So old wives' whereabouts think it's some protection to throw a hat or an apron at the werewolf, as if clothes made the man. Yet by the eyes, those phosphorescent eyes, you know him in all his shapes, the eyes, those unchanged by metamorphosis, Before he can become a wolf, the lycanthrope strips stark naked. If you spy a naked man among the pines, you must run as if the devil were after you. It is midwinter, and the robin, the friend of man, sits on the handle of the gardener's spade and sings. It is the worst time in all the year for wolves, but this strong-minded child insists she will go off canticle, a short song or hymn incorporated into a worship service through the wood. She is quite sure the beasts cannot harm her, although, well warned, she lays a carving knife in the basket her mother has packed with cheeses. There is a bottle of harsh liquor distilled from brambles, a batch of flat oatcakes baked on the hearthstone, a pot or two of jam. The flaxen-haired girl will take these delicious gifts to the reclusive grandmother, so old the burden of her years is crushing her to death. Granny lives 2 hours' trudge through the winter woods. The child wraps herself in her thick shawl, draws it over her head, steps out into her stout wooden shoes. She is dressed and ready, and it is Christmas Eve. The malign door of the solstice still swings upon its hinges, but she has been too much loved to ever feel scared. Children do not stay young for long in this savage country. There are no toys for them to play with, so they work hard and grow wise. But this one, so pretty and the youngest of her family, a little latecomer, had been indulged by her mother and the grandmother who knitted her the red shawl that today has the ominous, if brilliant, look of blood on snow. Her breasts have just begun to swell, her hair is like lint, so fair it hardly makes a shadow on her pale forehead. Her cheeks are an emblematic scarlet and white, and she has just begun her woman's bleeding, the clock inside her that will strike henceforth once a month. She stands and moves within the invisible pentacle of her own virginity. She is an unbroken egg, she is a sealed vessel. She has inside her a magic space, the entrance to which is shut tight with a plug of membrane. She's a closed system, she does not know how to shiver. She has her knife, and she's afraid of nothing. Her father might forbid her if he were home, but he is away in the forest gathering wood, and her mother cannot deny her. The forest closed upon her like a pair of jaws. There is always something to look at in the forest, even in the middle of winter. The huddled mounds of birds, succumbed to the lethargy of the season, heaped on the creaking boughs and too forlorn to sing. The bright frills of winter fungi on the blotched trunks of the trees, the cuneiform slots of rabbits and deer, the herringbone tracks of the birds, a hare as lean as a rasher of bacon streaking across the path, where the thin sunlit draperies, the russet brakes of last year's bracken. When she heard the freezing howl of a distant wolf, her practiced hand sprang to the handle of her knife. But she saw no sign of a wolf at all, nor of a naked man, neither, but then she heard a clattering among the brushwood, and there sprang onto the path a fully clothed one, a very handsome young one, in the green coat and wide-awake hat of a hunter, laden with carcasses of game birds. She had her hand on her knife at the first rustle of twigs, but he laughed with a flash of white teeth when he saw her and made her a comic yet flattering little bow. She had never seen such a fine fellow before, not among the rustic clowns of her native village. So on they went together, through the thickening light of the afternoon. Soon they were laughing and joking like old friends. When he offered to carry her basket, she gave it to him, although her knife was in it because he told her his rifle would protect them. As the day darkened, it began to snow again. She felt the first flakes settle in her eyelashes, but now there was only half a mile to go, and there would be fire and hot tea and a welcome, a warm one, surely for the dashing huntsman as well as for herself. This young man had a remarkable object in his pocket. It was a compass. She looked at the little round glass face in the palm of his hand and watched the wavering needle with a vague wonder. He assured her that this compass had taken him safely through the wood on his hunting trip because the needle always told him with perfect accuracy where north was. She did not believe it. She knew she should never leave the path on the way through the wood, or else she would be instantly lost. He laughed at her again. Gleaming trails of spittle clung to his teeth. He said if he plunged off the path into the forest that surrounded them, He could guarantee to arrive at her grandmother's house a good quarter of an hour before she did, plotting his way through the undergrowth with his compass while she trudged along the winding path. "I don't believe you. Besides, aren't you afraid of the wolves?" He only tapped the gleaming butt of his rifle and grinned. "Is it a bet?" he asked her. "Shall we make a game of it? What will you give me if I get to your grandmother's house before you?" "What would you like?" she asked disingenuously. "A kiss." Commonplaces of rustic seduction. She lowered her eyes and blushed. He went through the undergrowth and took her basket with him, but she forgot to be afraid of the beasts. Although now the moon was rising, she wanted to dawdle on her way to make sure the handsome gentleman would win his wager. Grandmother's house stood by itself, a little way out of the village. The freshly falling snow blew in eddies about the kitchen garden, and the young man stepped delicately up the snowy path to the door, as if he were reluctant to get his feet wet. Swinging his bundle of game and the girl's basket and humming a little tune to himself, there was a faint trace of blood on his chin. He's been snacking on his catch. He rapped upon the panels with his knuckles. Aged and frail, Granny is 3/4 succumbed to the mortality the ache of her bones promises her, and almost ready to give in entirely. A boy came out from the village to build up her hearth the night an hour ago, and the kitchen crackles with busy firelight. She has her Bible for company. She's a pious old woman. She's propped up on several pillars in the bed set to the wall, peasant fashion, wrapped up in a patchwork kilt she made before she was married, more years ago than she cares to remember. 2 China spaniels with liver-coloured blotches on their coats and black noses sit on either side of the fireplace. There is a bright rug of woven rags on the pantiles. The grandfather clock ticks away her eroding time. We keep the wolves outside by living well. He rapped upon the panels with his hairy knuckles. "It is your granddaughter," he mimicked in a high soprano. "Oh, lift up the latch and walk in, my darling." You can tell them by their eyes. Eyes of a beast of prey. Nocturnal, devastating eyes as red as a wound. You can hurl your Bible at him and your apron after, Granny. You thought that was a sure prophylactic against these infernal vermin. Now call on Christ and his mother and all the angels in heaven to protect you, but it won't do you any good. His feral muzzle is sharp as a knife. He drops his golden burned and gnawed pheasant on the table and puts down your dear girl's basket too. Oh my God, what have you done with her? Off with his disguise, that coat of forest-coloured cloth, the hat with the feathered tucked into the ribbon. His matted hair streams down his white shirt, and she can see the lice moving in it. The sticks in the hearth shift and hiss. Night and the forest has come into the kitchen, with darkness entangled in his hair. He strips off his shirt. His skin is the colour and texture of vellum. A crisp stripe of hair runs down his belly. His nipples are ripe and dark as poison fruit. But he's so thin, and you can count the ribs under his skin if he only gave you the time. He strips off his trousers, and she can see how hairy his legs are. The last thing the old lady saw in all this world was a young man, eyes like cinders, naked as stone, approaching her bed. The wolf is Carnivore Incarnate. When he finished, he licked his chops and quickly dressed himself again, until he was just as he had been when he came through her door. He burned the inedible hair in the fireplace and wrapped the bones up in a napkin that he hid under the bed and the wooden chest in which he found a clean pair of sheets. These he carefully put on the bed instead of the telltale stained ones he stowed away in the laundry basket. He plumped up the pillows and shook out the patchwork kilt. He picked up the Bible from the floor, closed it, and laid it on the table. All was it had been before, except that grandmother was gone. The sticks twitched in the grate, the clock ticked, and the young man sat patiently, deceitfully beside the bed in Granny's nightcap. Rat-a-tap-tap. Who's there?" he quavers in Granny's antique falsetto. "Only your granddaughter." So she came in, bringing with her a flurry of snow that melted in tears on the tiles. And perhaps she was a little disappointed to see only her grandmother sitting beside the fire. But then he flung off the blanket and sprang to the door, pressing his back against it so that she could not get out again. The girl looked round the room and saw that there was not even the indentation of a head on the smooth cheek of the pillow, and how, for the first time she'd seen it so, the Bible lay closed on the table. The tick of the clock cracked like a whip. She wanted a knife from her basket, but she did not dare to reach for it because his eyes were fixed upon her, huge eyes that now seemed to shine with a unique interior light, eyes the size of saucers, saucers full of Greek fire, diabolic phosphorescence. "What big eyes you have." All the better to see you with." No trace at all of the old woman, except for a tuft of white hair that had caught in the bark of the unburned log. When the girl saw that, she knew she was in danger of death. "Where's my grandmother?" "There's nobody here but we two, my darling." Now a great howling rose up all around them, near, very near, as close as the kitchen garden, the howling of a multitude of wolves. She knew the worst. Wolves are hairy on the inside, and she shivered. In spite of the scarlet shawl, she pulled more closely round herself as if it could protect her, although it was as red as the blood she must spill. "Who has come to sing us carols?" she said. "Those are the voices of my brothers, darling. I love the company of wolves. Look out the window and you'll see them." Snow half-caked the lattice, and she opened it to look into the garden. It was a white night of moon and snow. The blizzard whirled round the gaunt, grey beasts who squatted on their haunches among the rows of winter cabbage, pointing their sharp snouts to the moon and howling as if their hearts would break. 10 wolves, 20 wolves, so many wolves she could not count them, howling in concert as if demented or deranged. Their eyes reflected the light from the kitchen and shone like 100 candles. "It's very cold, poor things," she said. "No wonder they howl so." She closed the window on the wolves and took off her scarlet shawl, the colour of poppies, the colour of sacrifices, the colour of her menses, and since her fear did not do her any good, she ceased to be afraid. "What shall I do with my shawl?" "You won't need it again." She bundled up her shawl and threw it on the blaze, which instantly consumed it. Then she drew her blouse over her head. Her small breasts gleamed as if the snow had invaded the room. "And what shall I do with my blouse?" "Into the fire too, my pet." The thin muslin went flaring up like the chimney in a magic bird, and now came off her skirts, her woolen stockings, her shoes, and onto the fire they went too, and they were gone for good. The firelight shone through the edges of her skin. Now she was only clothed in her untouched instrument of flesh. This dazzling naked, she combed out her hair with her fingers. Her hair looked white as the snow outside, then went directly to the man with red eyes, in whose unkempt mane the lice moved. She stood up on tiptoe and unbuttoned the collar of his shirt. "What big arms you have." "All the better to hug you with." Every wolf in the world now howled a prothalamion outside the window as she freely gave the kiss she owed him. "And what big teeth you have." She saw how his jaw began to slaver, and the room was full of clamour of the forest, but the wise child never flinched, even when he answered, "All the better to eat you with." The girl burst out laughing. She knew she was nobody's meat. She laughed at him, full in the face. She ripped off his shirt for him and flung it in the fire, in the fiery wake of her own discarded clothing. The flames danced like dead souls, and The old bones under the bed set up a terrible clattering, but she did not pay them any heed. Carnivore Incarnate, only immaculate flesh appeases him. She will lay his fearful head on her lap, and she will pick out the lice from his pelt, and perhaps she will dye lice into her own mouth and eat them, as he will bid her, as she would do in a savage marriage ceremony. The blizzard will die down. The blizzard did die down, leaving the mountains as randomly covered as snow as if a blind woman had thrown a sheet over them. The upper branches of the forest pines limed, creaking, swollen with the fall. Snowlight, moonlight, a confusion of paw prints, all silent, all still. Midnight, and the clock strikes. It is Christmas Day, the werewolf's birthday. The door of the solstice stands wide open. Let them all sink through. See, sweet and sound she sleeps, between the paws of the tender wolf.